On December 9, 2004, an unfortunate incident unfolded as a group of 9 divers, including a guide, ventured into the depths of the Cenote Kalimba entrance of Sistema Sac Actun. Little did they know that something terrible was waiting for them in those waters. It turned into a tragedy that would change their lives forever. But how did such experienced divers not see something like this coming? Was there something they could have done to prevent this tragedy? Could they have taken any precautions? This is the terrifying and tragic tale of the Sac Actun, Yucatan tragedy. This is another episode of uncovering the disasters from around the world, and you are watching Disastrology. To understand this case better, it's important to look at all the factors that contributed to the incident. The first factor is none other than the location of this incident. Sistema Sac Actun is a vast underwater cave system which is located along the Caribbean coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, near Tulum. It has a humongous network of submerged passages, and it was recognized as the longest known underwater cave system in the year 2018 when it was connected to Sistema dos Ojos. As of January 2023, this cave system ranks as the second longest underwater cave in the world, only surpassed by Sistema Oxbel-Ha. This cave system is significant not just for its length, but also for its archaeological significance and beauty. Inside the caves, researchers have discovered remains of a mastodon and a human female, which are among the oldest evidence of human habitation in the Americas. Around 12,000 to 13,000 years ago, a Paleo-Indian girl who would later be named Naya fell into that sinkhole and died. Her nearly complete and genetically intact skeleton was discovered by divers in 2007, which was a really significant deal, as later on, research was done on the remains of the girl. And this find has been described as the oldest, most complete, and genetically intact human skeleton in the New World. The cave also holds significant fossil and archaeological discoveries, offering insights into both prehistoric life and early human activity in the region. In early 2007, the underwater cave Sistema Nohoch na Chich was connected to Sistema Sac Actun, making Sac Actun the longest surveyed underwater cave system in the world at that time. At that time, Sac Actun measured 143.4 miles. In January 2011, it expanded further when it connected with Sistema Actun Hu, adding 21 miles. As of January 2023, Sac Actun has an explored length of 161.2 miles. Given the extreme length of Sistema Sac Actun, it's important to note that there's much more to this cave system than just its historical significance. This place is a popular diving spot among divers, but sometimes many of them forget the danger of this place. This is a place where death lurks for those who push the limits in search of adrenaline. Sometimes the victims are the unprepared, and other times it's those who are simply unaware of the dangers that lie ahead. Something that many people find eerily creepy is a sign that can be found in the depths of Cenote. This is a sign that is enough to scare an experienced diver, let alone the people that are just casual explorers. Cenote Kalimba, the group's entrance to the Sistema Sac Actun, has a record of multiple fatalities. And in the group of 9 divers that day, 2 of them met with the same fate as many others had before them. This cenote is located about 1,500 feet northwest along Coba Road from the Grand Cenote, which is part of the Sistema Sac Actun. The 2 divers were Kent Hirsch, aged 53, who had completed 125 cave dives, and Michael G. Nast, aged 37, who had completed 75 cave dives. Both of them were experienced and skilled divers. So, what exactly went wrong? Why did they fall victim to such an accident? To know the answer to this question, we need to understand the dive plan of the team. Was there a fault in their structuring and planning? Was it just poor fortune? Or was it something entirely different? Now, at the point when this incident happened, the team had already been diving for several days, and that included 1 dive earlier in another part of the Sac Actun system. And at that point, they had gotten pretty accustomed to all of it. As for their dive plan for the day, it included a traverse between the Cenote Kalimba and Cenote Bosch Chen entrances along the route. That particular route is known for being notable for small but well-decorated passages and multiple junctions. The divers then decided to split into 2 groups. The first one comprised of 4 divers, and the other had 5. The first group, which comprised of 4 divers and the guide, planned to enter at Cenote Kalimba, follow the fixed lines to the Cenote Bosch Chen entrance, and return via the same route. Along the way, they would have to encounter 2 junctions, where they had planned to leave markers to make sure that they could find the correct exit route. For this group, everything went as planned, and no serious issues occurred. Whereas, things took a dark turn for the second group. The second team, composed of Kent Hirsch, Michael Nast, William Downey, and Gene Downey, had planned to enter after the first team and travel along the same route. They intended to take pictures and turn back at an appropriate time, rather than making the complete traverse to the Bosch-Chen entrance. Little did two of them know that they were heading into a dive that would end in tragedy. So, to roughly map out the plan, the dive plan called for the first team of 5 led by the guide to descend and follow the main permanent guideline to its end, where they would find a snap and gap. And for the second team, they planned to enter after the first team and travel along the same route, taking pictures and turn back at an appropriate time. Unlike the first group, they were not supposed to make a complete traverse to the Bosch-Chen entrance. The divers had thoroughly discussed their plan before going on the dive. They reviewed a map and created diagrams of the junctions they would encounter along their route. Now, for those that are unaware of what a snap and gap is, it is a kind of equipment used for underwater cave diving. It is set up and used to manage and secure lines in the cave. The setup essentially involves a few basic components: a snap, which is a quick release clip, and a gap, which is a section of the line or connection point designed to make attaching and detaching the line easier. This setup is made in order to help the divers navigate and maintain a level of safety on their ventures. It helps by marking their path and managing the line throughout their dive. Now, the snap and gap in question is a piece of line which is approximately 20 feet in length, attached to the end of the kalimba line that has a carabiner at its other end. And that is so because that can be used in place of a jump reel to create a continuous guideline from the end of the permanent kalimba line to the Passo de Lagarto permanent guideline. Typically, when not in use, the snap and gap line is rolled up and placed at the end of the kalimba line. As Team 1 continued according to the plan, they discovered that the snap and gap line was already connected to the Passo de Lagarto line. This connection was at the point where the main line from Cenote Kalimba ends, and a second line diverges from the junction to enter a passage known as Passo de Lagarto. They then placed a yellow personal non-directional marker labeled number 1 on the snap and gap line. This marker was used to communicate with the other team, signaling that the line was in use and indicating where they should exit at this intersection. Around this area, 2 white line arrows on the Passo de Lagarto line point downstream towards Cenote Hotul or the Grand Cenote and away from Kalimba, so it is a really significant intersection per se. The first team followed the Passo de Lagarto line downstream for about 65 feet until they got to a point where the permanent guideline takes a sharp right turn. It was the second junction, and at this location, a single white line arrow points downstream towards Cenote Hotul or the Grand Cenote. The arrow also indicates a short jump to a permanent guideline on the left that would lead them to Cenote Bosch-Chen. Team 1 followed the permanent guideline to Cenote Bosch-Chen for about 500 feet. They then added a spool to bridge a 5-foot gap, completing the Bosch-Chen circuit. After this, they continued along the circuit in a clockwise direction until they reached Cenote Bosch-Chen. At one point, the divers used a jump reel to connect to a fixed line in the Bosch-Chen passage and marked the junction once again to indicate the correct route for their return. For the first group, everything went smoothly without any major issues or hindrances. They then proceeded to make their way to the Bosch-Chen entrance, where they surfaced briefly before starting back through the cave to retrace their route. As per the plans discussed by both the teams, the second team was about to descend shortly after the first team, allowing them a good start to follow their objectives. However, they were unaware of the fate that awaited 2 of their members. They would enter the water, but would never see the sunlight again. The plan for the second team was to follow the Bosch-Chen line set up by Team 1, and they were to bypass the jump installed by Team 1 on the Bosch-Chen line and continue in an anti-clockwise direction. This meant that instead of using the jump reel, Team 2 would skip it and proceed along the line towards Cenote Bosch-Chen until they reached their destination. Things were going just fine up until a certain point, where the situation took a drastic turn. After following the Bosch-Chen passage for some distance, they turned their dive and started back towards Cenote Kalimba. Team 2 was expected to turn their dive before actually reaching the Cenote Bosch-Chen, based on their air consumption rates. They were anticipated to exit the cave ahead of Team 1. It should also be noted that one member of Team 2 had a digital camera in an underwater housing with strobes and planned to take photographs of the dive. When they reached the junction with the Passo de Lagarto line, they needed to turn right to follow the line to the Snap and Gap and the Kalimba line, but instead of turning right, they went left. They were following the Passo de Lagarto line toward the Cenote Grande and Cenote Hotul entrances. And the worst part about all of this is that they did not realize their mistake until they reached the end of the Paso de Lagarto line, which was around some 1,400 feet downstream from the actual Snap and Gap junction. The first team was under the impression that Team 2 had already exited ahead of them, and as per the plans, they would meet around the parking area. But things became more and more worrisome when Team 2 could not be found anywhere near the expected place. Upon reaching the parking area, the guide became concerned that Team 2 were not there as they should have ideally been. The guide then drove in one of the group's vehicles the short distance towards the Grand Cenote entrance, hoping that the lost members of the group may have exited there. Nobody was aware of the critical condition Team 2 was in. Hirsch attached the line from his safety reel to the end of the Lagarto line and began searching for the Cenote Grande line. Nast, however, started back upstream along the Paso de Lagarto, with Gene Downey following. Bill Downey was also after them, and Hirsch abandoned his search, picking up his spool and following the group. Something interesting about this whole situation is that 2 days prior to this, all 4 divers had been on a dive from the Cenote Grande entrance upstream to the Snap and Gap via the Paso de Lagarto. They were aware that the end of the line leading to Cenote Grande and Cenote Hotul line was somewhere in the distance of about 65 feet from the end of the Paso de Lagarto line. The Cenote Grande entrance was only about 700 feet away, and the Cenote Hotul entrance was to be closer. The 4 divers started to retrace their path along the Paso de Lagarto to the Snap and Gap, and then to the Kalimba line. While traveling through the Kalimba passage, they got separated from each other. Bill and Gene Downey were ahead, with Hirsch and Nast only a short distance behind. Bill Downey's air supply ran low, so he and Gene had to share air. They managed to reach the Kalimba entrance and the surface with their tanks almost empty from sharing it together. As they made their way to the top, they had barely escaped death. Despite the guide's efforts, Hirsch and Nast were still nowhere to be found. After checking the Grand Cenote without success, the guide returned to Kalimba. There, the 2 survivors from Team 2 surfaced, sharing air and with approximately 500 psi left in one set of doubles. The survivors informed the other members of the team and the guide that 2 of the members were still stuck in the cave. At this point, the guide and 2 other members of Team 1 re-entered the water in hopes of saving the missing divers. They went back downstream along the permanent Kalimba line to search for the missing divers, but unfortunately, they were too late, and what they found would horrify them for the rest of their lives. They found the missing divers about 250 feet from the entrance. The divers were together, with their second stages out of their mouths, and facing towards the Kalimba exit. The men had drowned after exhausting their air supply. Both victims were found with their tanks completely empty. One of the victims had their primary light still on, while the other was discovered at the cave ceiling with their primary light turned off and stowed, and a backup light on the cave floor below them. Their long hose was tangled, suggesting a struggle or entanglement. The divers were left shocked by the scene they had just witnessed, but at a crucial time like this, they could not have lost their composure. So they decided to recover the dead bodies of their fellow divers. One of them was able to recover the first victim. The guide and another diver then attempted to recover the second victim, but this was a challenging task due to the narrowness of the cave passage and the tangled long hose. A few days after the incident, another diver reported that the permanent line at the recovery site was broken. This damage most likely occurred during the process of retrieving the bodies, and the divers involved in the recovery probably didn't notice it. The break in the line wasn't mentioned by the survivors or the recovery divers, and it doesn't seem to be connected to the accident itself. After the bodies were brought to the surface, local authorities took possession of both the victims' bodies and their diving equipment. They conducted interviews with the guide and all members of the diving group at the Ministerio Público in Tulum to gather information and investigate the incident. Accident analysis shows that the most common cause of fatalities among trained cave divers in this area of Mexico is confusion and disorientation. This often happens during dives that are relatively complex, causing the divers to become lost and unable to find their way back out of the cave, which ultimately becomes the reason for their death. As for this case, it is clear that many factors played into such a tragedy unfolding and causing 2 fatalities within a span of minutes. Was there anything they could have done to prevent this accident from happening? What were the biggest mistakes that these divers committed? And most importantly, what can other divers learn from this incident? Do let us know your thoughts down in the comments. And don't forget to like this video in case you haven't already, and share this with your diver friends. For more such videos, don't forget to subscribe to Disastrology, and we will be coming to you soon with more such cases.